Is that good?
We're good now.
All right. Yay, I did something new.
Okay, I'm gonna back up just a couple slides and say, remember, fair housing is not about a Texas Real Estate Commission complaint. That would be way too simple. Fair housing is a federal issue and becomes very serious, criminally serious, very quickly. So if you get a fair housing complaint, it's Texas Workforce Commission, Civil Rights Division, or the Housing and Urban Development Headquarters in Fort Worth, which is a federal complaint. We have a new listing agreement for leases as of July 8th. You need to get key box authorization if anyone occupies the property. It's a good idea to get this rental flood disclosure when you list a property. All right, and here's where we are with the new, as of July 8th, version of the residential lease application. Tenant selection criteria. The landlord or owner should help create and should give okay in writing. It must be posted on MLS or you can get a complaint against you. And you must follow it, right? If you get it. So what does the words tenant selection criteria mean? That means we're going to select a tenant based on this list of criteria that we're publicizing, not based on, whoo, I hope somebody awesome applies. Well, I'm just going to gather applications. I'm going to see whoever's best. Nope, that's not legal. So we do have to publicize tenant selection criteria on MLS. All right. This is just in general, landlord chooses the tenant, right? It talks a little bit about HUD guidelines were updated in 2016. You can't have a blanket policy of refusing anyone with any type of criminal record. You can't do that. You have to specifically say felonies. Maybe you don't want anyone with a felony. Maybe you don't want anyone with any property damage or harm to, abuse, domestic abuse. You can choose which kinds of criminals you do not want to rent to, but you cannot say, I'm not going to rent to any criminal. That's discriminatory. You can choose an income amount. 3 times monthly rent is very normal. That there's no standard, but that's not unusual. You can say no smoking. You can say no history of non-payment of rent, no prior evictions. You can ask for a certain length of employment. You can ask for a certain credit score, no bankruptcies. Every occupant must complete an application and agree to having their credit run and a background check. You can say every bit of that, all of that is normal. Remember, the landlord chooses the tenant, not you. The property owner has 7 days to notify an applicant of their decision, or the application is considered rejected. The landlord and you must be uniform and consistent on your choices. And you should keep records of why someone was chosen instead of someone else. This is what I'm recommending you guys all refer to is the model, the sample of the tenant selection criteria form that has been provided to you by our state association. It's an awesome thing and helps you really talk to your landlord in a sensible manner. And remember, this is all about the landlord. Our KW office doesn't do property management unless it's a property that you own. So therefore, the landlord's going to choose the tenant, then the landlord has to follow the Texas property code in terms of getting repairs done and all those things. I highly recommend, really almost it's just nonsensical, not to use a tenant screening service so that you're not the one running all the reports and having an opinion about anything. Nope. Smart move is through our state association, and the first one every month you get a discount on. This is more about Smart Move. It's a wonderful product. Realtor.com has Avail, which is a very similar product. It's a good product also. And basically, the tenant applies through this service, and then you get a report on which tenant is best, is basically what it is. All right. Then when you're giving a response back to tenants who are not chosen, you want to use this adverse action notice and credit score disclosure to say either I'm not choosing you because of your credit score, or I'm not choosing you because of some other reason, and the action is not based on your credit score. And then you probably going to need to tell them what it's based on, that they didn't have enough income, or they had an eviction in their past, whatever the reason might be. All right, here is our TexasRealEstate.com, our association website, has wonderful Q&A available to you. And this is a question I think we get a lot. It says an applicant, a landlord wants to wait before deciding on an applicant to see if a better tenant comes along. And this says, according to the Texas Property Code, if the landlord provides an application form, the 7-day period begins on the day the applicant submits the completed form. Or the 7-day period begins on the date the property owner accepts an application deposit, a fee. So you really have 7 days to notify someone whether they're in or not in as an accepted tenant. So no, you can't just wait forever and gather up applicants and see who you like best. Oh, and boy, does that sound like a fair housing problem, just even that sentence, right? Who do you like the best? And then just to be sure you're super smart on all these topics, the Americans with Disabilities Act actually does not apply to leasing a property unless it's a public property. Everything else is covered under fair housing. It is not ADA that applies unless it's public accommodation where business is going to be conducted. So let's make sure that we use our correct language and talk about fair housing, which is what we have to live by. All right. There are some great videos and articles about assistance animals. This is a very big deal when leasing a property. What if you aren't able to actually see an individual or to discern, to be able to tell whether there is a disability or not? And it's okay to ask for verification of the disability and the disability related need in writing from a doctor, from some sort of reasonable source. It's okay to ask. You just have to be sure you follow the same protocol every single time. Oh, and look at this. All of these things can be considered reasonable accommodation requests. Grab bars in the bathroom, widening doorways, removing under the counter cabinets. Here you go. Requesting that carpeting be removed, that maintenance staff not use certain chemicals. All these things can be considered reasonable accommodation requests, and landlords need to be prepared to agree to them. So this is not a joke. Like, this is not easy. It is not easy to be a landlord. It is not easy to be a landlord without a professional property manager who makes learning all this stuff their livelihood. Super important. Okay, and then these are all forms about assistance animals. Number on the left is the general info. So if your landlord says, I don't want to let that big old dog in my house, you might share with them this general information regarding assistance animals so that they as a landlord can get more educated, right? We don't want our landlords getting in trouble. So let's be sure that we help them. This is an I want to help you, Mr. Landlord, be smarter form. So that's great. And then Here is a response to a request for an assistant animal. This helps the landlord respond and reply correctly to a request to have an assistance animal. And then here is an animal agreement that is goes with the lease. So when the lease is made, you might need to include an animal agreement. And that is a new form. It's been updated as of July 8th. So all these things are things to know. Fair housing can jump up in the craziest ways. One is putting a low occupancy limit. So they would expect you to allow 2 persons per bedroom to occupy the home. So if you have a 3-bedroom home and you say the max number of people that can live there is 4, that could be discrimination. Seems crazy to me. You can't say things like, hey, I give a discount to Italian American club members. You shouldn't market it as ideal for young, single, and professional. We shouldn't be talking about walking distance. We should be talking about near or convenient to. And then your landlords need to understand this also. They have to accommodate for maintenance scheduling and what kind of maintenance they do and how quickly they do it and who does it and what kind of chemicals they use, what kind of tools they use. All of that has something to do with fair housing. All right. The lease was updated as of July 8th also. It goes into much better detail about the monthly rent and where to pay it. It includes the flood disclosure as a part of the lease. These are other forms you're going to want to include with the lease. This is the tenant and occupant information. Great form for anybody that's going to live in the home. Now we have a residential lease sight unseen addendum that just verifies they never saw it in person and they're leasing it anyway. Flood disclosure, again, super important that it be included now. And here is the residential lease inventory and condition form. It did not change as of July 8th, but you still want to use it. Super duper important form for both the landlord and the tenant to agree that when the tenant moves in, the condition is this. There's a hole in this wall or there's no hole in this wall. So a video can be great, and this form is even better because all parties should sign. All right. Late fees changed a couple years ago, and just to make sure you know when you're completing a lease now, because the landlord transaction side of the transaction usually completes the lease. So now you have to give people 2 full days after due date to turn in their, before you can charge them a late fee. Anything 12% or less is considered reasonable automatically by a court. And then any fees, the tenant may request a written statement of any fees that have been charged to their bill. And then here's the agreement between brokers. We really want this. Collecting for leases these days is just a mess. People pay the landlord, people pay the agent, people pay everybody except for who they're supposed to pay, or they don't pay at all. So we want to do business with landlords who are smart enough and care enough to slow down and write checks the correct way, because it sure does make life easier. All right. You are also, in addition to the tenant selection criteria, if you get any sort of complaint filed against you for a lease listing, you and, well, even representing a tenant, you are required to have a privacy policy in place. I know that not many people do this, but you still should at least have one and date stamp it on the day you have it. The landlord should also have a privacy policy in place if they are going to get the social security number or anything else. Now, if you're using one of those screening systems, you probably are not ever even going to get all of that information. But if you are going to get it, you have to have a locked cabinet. You have to have, how are you keeping it safe? And then here again, our wonderful state association has provided us with a model privacy policy. So you can read this and pick which parts make sense to you and begin to kind of live by this. This will be how you keep people's data safe. Woo. All right, so you may manage your own properties, but you may not be a property manager for others through your Keller Williams office. So if you're trying to do that, there are ways to set up a separate company that is not related to your Keller Williams business. Remember, the landlord chooses the tenant, the landlord evicts, the landlord repairs. And so we don't give advice or counsel about what rights tenants have to get out early or stay late, or that's all based on whatever the lease says, which we do not help enforce. So the best advice I can give you is to send them resources, not answers, right? Have them go look at some of these places with whatever questions they have. And then this is the world's greatest video. It's 23 minutes and it was updated in 2020. It takes you step by step by step through filling out a residential lease. So if you have any questions, this is a great resource for you. All right. And then next week, we're going to talk about all the new forms. There are a whole bunch of them, and some of them are very exciting and important to us. So we want to know all about them. All right. What do y'all think about all of those lease forms? Tori, I'm going to go to you first. Just, are you surprised by some of that?
Yeah, a little bit. They definitely gave us more stuff to work with, you know, which I think is good. You know,
I think that's right. They gave us a little bit more guidance, I think, with assistance animals and all that. It's actually, if we'll use what they gave us, it got a little clearer.
Yes.
And that's a wonderful thing.
One question I have, and I want your opinion on this. So often you'll see in the MLS, the realtor will say, submit the Texas Realtor lease. And then if everything looks okay, then we will submit you over to Smart Move for fully applying versus them. Is that, do you feel like that is okay? Or do you feel like that's kind of a iffy proposition because you are looking and saying, yeah, we'll go ahead and run you, or no, we won't. But sometimes on the face of the lease application, you can see, based on what they're saying, they don't have the income or whatever else. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so I think I don't understand why you would need to do that if you're publishing your tenant selection criteria.
Okay.
Right? So if we're doing this right, they are reading something that says 3 times the rent is the required monthly income, and we have to be able to verify that income. No bankruptcies or evictions. No 30 days late on your rent or mortgage. I mean, if we're doing that, I don't think we need to submit an application first. I think we kind of defeat the whole purpose of using one of those services then almost.
Okay. That makes
Does
sense.
that make sense? Is that right, you think?
Yes. No, that makes sense. I think sometimes you just, you know, how tenants will apply for anything and everything. I'll be fine. I can do it, you know. So,
Yeah.
yes, that makes sense.
Well, and what I like and don't like, so full disclosure, they have to pay the fee to this smart tenant or to Avail. And there's no, it's not like when they pay a fee to you and you might refund it back to them. These places are running all the reports, so they don't refund those fees.
Yeah.
I like that because then it's not on our agent, dependent on our agent making any decisions. I don't like that because you're right. Sometimes tenants just apply for everything and there was no way they were going to be approved. But the trick is, if someone's interested, make sure they have the tenant selection criteria. That's the trick.
And on the tenant selection criteria, often you'll just see in the actual MLS sheet, 3 times monthly rent, this credit score, et cetera. Is that sufficient, or do we still need to have a whole nother piece of paper that is uploaded and maybe even signed off on by the potential tenant?
So I don't think that in just comments, you could have enough to be the full
Okay.
tenant selection criteria. But I don't really know that I think that you're obligated to get that back from the tenant
Okay.
side. I mean, you're just obligated to publicize it to be sure anybody interested has it. And a lot of people go into great detail about, I want you to have had your job for at least 12 months. I want you to, no smoking. No, all occupants. We're going to run a background check and a credit report on every occupant. Maybe you can get all that in MLS, but I doubt it.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that I had last week when meeting with some agents where they've got a lot of potential tenants that don't have a social security number, and they ran into issues with that.
Yep.
What is your advice to them?
I think they're going to struggle with single family rentals. And maybe even apartments, but certainly single family rentals. A lot of single family rentals are by an individual that has, 3, 4, 5 homes, not by a professional company. And so they are only going to know how to use like a credit bureau or something that runs on a social security number. So I think the single family, infrastructure, I think is the right word, is not going to be as easy to manipulate for them as maybe apartments owned by a big corporation would be. That's very difficult. It is just very difficult.
Yeah.
Situation.
Well, that's what they were expressing. They just felt like it was really, really hard to get them into a home, a property without that.
Yep. I think it is really, really hard, and I don't have a great answer outside of, I think apartments that are corporately owned are better set up to do other kinds of checks. It reminds me a little bit of, we just came out of the market where getting an FHA buyer accepted was just next to impossible. FHA contracts just wouldn't be accepted, and it made people mad. And was it discriminatory? Maybe, I don't really know, but I just know, FHA has condition requirements. There are frequently repairs required, and we weren't in a market where sellers were going to do that. And so there you go. It's a little bit the same way with these leases without a social security. I mean, you can't make a landlord do that. It's a little bit that same thing. And right now, they don't have to. They can be choosy.
Is that something in the model tenant criteria that needs to be explicit, or is that?
It becomes very explicit when they apply through one of these services.
Okay.
It's a stop. It's a hard stop. And it's okay to say, you have to apply through this service, and I don't want to entertain any applications except for through this Smart Move service. Which is kind of saying the same thing without being so direct. Okay, I think the other really earth-changing things out there that you learn is that fair housing is not about the Texas Real Estate Commission. They think, oh, well, I'll just deal with a complaint when I get it. And it's like, well, okay, not going to be so easy. It's very complex. It is a federal problem, and gosh, if you try to fight them, if it goes south, you have to go to a federal court out in East Texas, in Marshall, to be specific. So, I mean, you do not want to be in business with a landlord that is not willing to just follow the rules. So, okay, and next week we'll talk all about the new forms, which will be fun, because a lot of those are really good, strong, in our favor changes that happen that make life easier. So it'll be fun. All right, you guys, Tori, you want to stop our recording?
Yes, hold on 1 second. Stop more. Aha. Yes.